What's the role of the board chair? And what are the particular skills and dispositions required to be successful? In this video, we briefly explore the different facets of being a board chair and tease out some of the skills and approaches that can be developed. There's a whole new series dedicated to the role of the board chair, with relevant insights and activities to help those new to the role to see how they can play a pivotal part in directing the attention of the board and responding to issues as they arise, and can therefore impact the whole school community. For now, we can look briefly at the specific roles of the board chair. First and foremost, the chair is the leader of the board, but what does that mean? If you could ask 100 teachers to define learning, you'd probably get 100 slightly different answers, and the same could be said for leadership. While those 100 people could give examples, skills, and character traits, it's harder to have a definition, since leadership is also relevant to circumstance. Leadership on the football field may look different to the battlefield. The boardroom would be very different to the classroom. Nevertheless, there are some commonalities that we can glean from research and experience that gives us some great starting points. And while we don't want to get into the natural born leader situation and the nature versus nurture argument, there are certain characteristics and skills that can be learned, practiced, and mastered. And of course, here we're talking about leadership, which are the character traits of someone that stands out from the crowd, but is not the same as authority, which is the power wielded due to the position held in the organization. The chair does have a position of authority in the school, but this should not substitute the skills that are essential to ensure harmonious and effective relationships on the board, with the head of school and with the wider community. Leadership as the chair is the ability to have clarity in thought that creates and shares a clear and passionate vision for what is possible, whether as a board or as the school, and the skills to inspire and empower others to work courageously together towards common goals. The chair, as leader of the board, has to finely balance often opposing drivers. And just like a cooking recipe, it relies on just the right amount of spice or just the right time in the oven. So too leadership is about being attuned to the changing circumstances and adjusting things accordingly. At times, the chair needs to be decisive and resolute, while at others, being humble and empathetic. The trick, of course, is knowing the difference. Successful leaders always act with integrity, whether or not someone is watching, and are usually very self-aware, continually reflecting on their actions and interactions with others, since they know how important it is to get the best out of their people. They tend to use influence rather than authority to create a sense of infectious positivity that leads to natural delegation and collaboration. Maybe you're watching this even though you're not the board chair. Good for you. As you've probably realized already, as a trustee you have exactly the same obligations to act with integrity and to thoughtfully balance the influence that you wield on the board and in the community. The board chair facilitates discussion by creating an environment and norms that value honest dialogue. This itself is an art that can be learned through deliberate practice. The board chair will want to lead conversations, but needs to approach these deliberately. So first we should distinguish perhaps between dialogue, which is a sharing of ideas and viewpoints, as compared to a debate, which is more about presenting a stance, which is much more of a win-lose type approach. If the chair initiates dialogue or discussion, and in so doing expresses his or her opinions at the outset, then there's a danger that the ensuing conversation is going to be influenced by this opinion, for better or for worse. So if that's the case, the chair should have very good reason to state the opinion in the first place, or risk the fact that some people may feel obligated to simply follow the party line, or may wish to contradict the point simply to be awkward. But neither of those may reflect really their true thoughts on the topic at hand. The thoughtful chair could introduce the discussion point in a neutral way and let the various trustees share their opinions before putting forth his or her own opinions much later in the conversation, or allow someone else to lead the conversation, perhaps the head of school or a committee chair, for example, and to use good questions to ensure everybody is on the same page. These nuances help ensure that the individual trustees can fulfill their obligations of speaking their mind on important topics, and the chair will need to remain vigilant to how the conversation is flowing. In some cases, you might want to start the discussion with questions to frame the problem, or to start with a few moments of quiet deliberation to reflect and allow people to gather their thoughts. As chair, you'll be attentive to ensure that everyone has had an opportunity to express themselves, which could be to specifically ask opinions of reticent trustees, such as, "Jane, perhaps you've got some thoughts you'd like to share," or simply go around the table. Equally, you don't want to allow discussion to be dominated by one or two vocal trustees at the cost of the others. As discussion moves back and forth, the chair will be looking for consensus. While not all decisions will be unanimous, it's critical that you've given everyone the opportunity to express themselves. A common essential agreement among boards is that while everyone has the right to their opinion and lively debate in a meeting, any decision voted on by the board must be supported by all trustees. You can imagine how the board will become splintered and ineffective very quickly if trustees are going to publicly distance themselves from board decisions they didn't like personally. The only way that people generally accept this principle is if they've had a genuine opportunity to express themselves openly during the meeting. On the other hand, the chair must also be attentive to any conflict that emerges through the board interactions. While differences of opinion are healthy and necessary for an effective board, the attentive chair looks for signs that maybe indicate a personal conflict rather than just a difference of opinion. When conversations become heated, it's also too easy for comments to be made that can spoil relationships and therefore mean that the board is no longer cohesive and effective as a team. An astute chair knows when to sit back and watch the conversation and when to step in and refocus the discussion. A refocus technique could be to simply take the floor and give a quick summary of the various positions, thereby allowing people a few minutes to calm down and change their own mental state. A chair can use this opportunity not only to summarize the discussion points, but to refocus on the goal or the school's mission, thereby helping trustees get back to the big picture and away from any personal agendas. By carefully steering the conversation, the chair can ensure productive meetings that are focused on the school's priorities. Building strong relationships with trustees helps ensure that detailed work is delegated to the committees and that there are procedures and norms for bringing these deliberations back to the whole board. The chair, therefore, coordinates the different aspects of the work being done, which requires an understanding of the organisation, of the board, and the individuals and the priorities of the school. The chair collaborates with the head of school to set the agenda for meetings and will want to ensure a culture of no surprises, usually by arranging regular meetings, touching base type meetings with the head of school. Remember that the board typically only employs one person directly, the head of school, and therefore the relationship between the chair and the head of school is a critical one for the success of the school. While this relationship should be professional and cordial, there are occasions where a chair may have to sit down and have a difficult conversation with the head of school. You also have a role to play in ensuring the evaluation of the head of school is conducted appropriately and professionally. With these different facets, it's important that there's a strong, mutually respectful and trusting relationship that encourages transparency, anticipates issues, and collaborates on strategies. The chair has a shared responsibility with the head of school when presenting the school publicly, whether through meetings with stakeholders on strategic issues or public events. A board is unlikely to spontaneously be very effective. The chair, therefore, needs to create and nurture the systems that will lead to being impactful as a board. This doesn't mean that the chair actually does the work, but having a vision of the board and strategies of how to get there, he or she can work with the trustees and head of school to put systems in place. So, for example, while the chair would set the agenda with the head of school for board meetings, it may be more difficult to work with each of the committees. However, the chair could have systems in place to liaise with the committee chairs to set agenda, or could have an annual calendar of key issues already set out. So, for example, knowing that the finance committee have a monthly meeting to look at the cash flow and income statement, wouldn't necessarily mean that they get through all of the other tasks in good time. So perhaps if you look at fees or salary adjustments, they may need to be approved, let's say by December, so that parents and teachers know exactly where they stand for the next academic year. This means that budget projections have to have been considered by the Finance Committee and approved by the whole board before then. Boards are also unlikely to naturally reflect on their own individual and collective performance, unless guided and institutionalized. Again, the chair may delegate this responsibility, along with board training needs and trustee selection, to, for example, a governance committee. Finally, and perhaps harder to pin down, is the need for the board to be cohesive and disciplined in its decision-making, which ultimately requires the chair to know when to intercede and steer the board, and when to step back and let it flow. There's an ever-present danger that decision-making becomes fragmented and each issue that arises is acted on and decisions made. While the intentions may be honourable, the overall direction and impetus may be lost through unrelated minor initiatives. Keeping the board focused on the school's identified priorities sounds easier than it actually is, especially when faced with parent appeals or challenging circumstances along the way. But it's exactly these distractions that can easily take up your time and energy without advancing your identified mission. As you reflect now on the crucial role of the board chair, what observations might you make about your own school? Without being personal, what 3 things might you want to raise as discussion points to work cohesively as a board to be more impactful?